facts on the Russia probe clearly got worse for Donald Trump this week, from his lawyer confessing to those Russia lies to his campaign chair getting busted for an alleged double-cross operation against the special counsel, to these damning facts that we've all seen accumulate. And it may move Trump critics and independents for sure, or at least harden the resistance that's already out there. But what about conservatives and Republicans? Well, tonight, I can report some of it may be changing. Take a conservative with a very conservative, iconic last name, Podhoretz, John Podhoretz, who announced that while he has long been a self-described skeptic of the collusion with Russia's story, two big developments, he says, now show there may be a strong case for collusion. The revelation that Cohen lied about Trump's business interests, which we've been covering. And two, I'm reading from him, quote, the first possible connection between Russian intel and actions taken by the president, Credico telling Jerome Corsi that WikiLeaks had a lot of stuff on Hillary, and Corsi telling Roger Stone the stuff was coming and that Trump should start to talk about Hillary's health, which he did. And Podhoretz didn't just announce that there. He wrote it and published it in the very conservative Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post for, I presume, many other conservatives to read and see and judge for themselves. Or take another Republican, Matt Lewis, who now warns his fellow conservatives they should question how they will react in the future if Mueller's evidence does show what he calls nefarious, unethical, and criminal actions that go to the height of the Trump administration. Reading from Mr. Lewis, quote, we should be ready to accept the very real possibility that serious misdemeanors were committed and lies told. The people who defend the indefensible, who put, quote, loyalty to a man, not principle or America, above all else, will not be judged well by history. Joining me now for a little contemporaneous history is E.J. Dionne, opinion writer for The Washington Post and an analyst here. And back with me at the table in Washington, Ruth Marcus. E.J., two op-eds does not a revolution make. I'm sure you're familiar with that old Mark Twain quote. But what is happening here in your view?
Well, good on John Podhoretz and Matt Lewis. I think it should be said that they've always been a little more independent from Donald Trump than most Republican politicians. And I think it's going to take more evidence to push Republicans against Trump now than it took to push them against Richard Nixon in 1973 and 74, because this is a much more conservative and less presidentially independent party. But we did have an interesting moment this week when the Senate voted by a very big margin against the president's position on Saudi Arabia. And there were a lot of Republican defections. And a political scientist I was talking to tonight had the interesting idea that this was kind of a trial run. These Republicans will be able to see how much pushback do they get for breaking with Trump like this. Now, the Saudi issue is not one I suspect Trump's passionate supporters have really strong opinions on, but it is an indicator that it is possible for Republicans to break with Trump. But as I say, I think Mueller is going to have to come up with a lot of evidence before most of them are ready to walk away.
Ruth?
So I'm an op-ed editor, so I have to say I think two op-eds can a revolution make, but I would like to see the op-eds be from, say, a sitting elected Republican as opposed to armchair conservative just opining. And what we have seen all along during the Trump administration is, and increasingly, the capitulation of the elected part of the Republican Party. Certainly, a lot of the conservative commentariat has accommodated itself in a quite disappointing way to Trump as well.
So let me ask you,
but it's the elected officials who have really not stood up to him.
How do you explain that, being the political op-ed editor that you are, after a November election that delivered 39 seats to the Democrats, a larger popular margin than we've seen in 40 years, including the midterms after Watergate, a higher voter turnout since women were given the right to vote in midterms. I mean, just a huge blue wave that shows, and that's midterms, that the further reckoning may be coming for Republicans who don't find their own independence here.
So a reckoning may be coming, but a few things. One is before the general election reckoning is a primary reckoning.
Right.
And it goes back to something that EJ mentioned, which is you can imagine a world maybe not that many months from now in which Mueller comes out with a devastating report and congressional support for President Trump begins to crumble in the way that it did during Watergate. And we sort of have this rosy view of Watergate where brave, honest Republicans stood up. No, they didn't.
No.
They didn't turn against Richard Nixon until they had to turn against Richard Nixon. But we
And the people turned first.
And the people turned first. So when Republican senators and Republican House members are convinced that their electoral fate is better off diverging themselves from Donald Trump, they will do that because there's no love lost for Donald Trump among most of those. But when you have a very gerrymandered, very tribalized, very polarized primary base electorate that is still solidly with Trump, that is where they are the voters, and their leaders, their elected officials will follow from them.
Well, and EJ, that goes to a migration we've seen in a lot of Republican thought, which went from, well, of course, it would be wrong to get foreign help with a campaign to something much more muddled, which is a preview of a strategy to minimize even damning things in the Mueller report. I obviously was thinking about this as I was interviewing Jerome Corsi this week because he is the red hot center of that. Mueller has given him paperwork showing that he may indict him for lying, but he was very blunt in our interview about saying the whole point of the intel he was trying to gather from WikiLeaks was to help Trump. Take a look.
Told Stone, and I told about everybody I knew, and I knew it would help help Donald Trump, and I was happy to do that. I was speculating, but I was sure I was right.
Is it accurate to say you expected Roger to tell Trump?
I didn't. Look, logically, should I have expected it? Yes, of course.
Yes. Yes, of course, EJ. He admits that he went in Europe to get this intel on the stolen emails and wanted to get it to Trump.
Right. Well, you know what those two op-eds show is that it's become much harder to continue to support Trump slavishly. But it's not clear that Republicans are ready to stop now. And to go to Ruth's point, I think the key is when do Republicans start worrying more about a general election result than about a primary result? And as you suggested, the results certainly in the House races said Republicans have a lot to worry about. So I think there are 4 senators who will give us good indications. The 2 most vulnerable incumbents in 2020 are Susan Collins and Cory Gardner. They're going to be, I think, your leading indicators if there starts to be a break with Trump. Probably the next most vulnerable are Tom Tillis in North Carolina and Joni Ernst in Iowa. If they break, then he's in real trouble. And then we may have seen a point where there's so much evidence that the Republicans can't hang on. But
of course, you know what Mark Twain also said is every time it seems like Susan Collins is about to break with Trump, she leaks for 4 days, gives a couple press conferences, and then takes it all back on the Senate floor. I'm sure you remember that old saying.
Mark Twain said it as well as it could be said. No, that's right. And you saw that on the Kavanaugh business for sure. And that's why I'm saying it is going to take a lot to get these folks to break. But I think she, above everyone, has the most to worry about from her general election electorate in Maine.
Not totally sure she's going to run again. I think that's still an open question, and that'll be interesting to watch as well.
I mean, she has got to be one of the most phony moderates around.
Well, sometimes she's voting against her party, but most of the time she's voting with them, and she did this last time around. Bigly, I think.
Bigly. You heard it here first.
Bigly.
Bigly. Well, I'm going to fit in a break, but Friday night politics and some very interesting insights. My special thanks to EJ Dionne and Ruth Marcus.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.